Search and rescue crews continue to look for survivors in the US state of Kentucky, where record flooding has wiped out entire communities. At least 28 people have died, although the state's governor warned the number could rise.
The Appalachian Mountains, ancient and formidable, stretch across the eastern United States as one of the most iconic natural formations on the continent. For hundreds of millions of years, they have endured erosion, tectonic collisions, and the steady passage of time. Yet now, unsettling evidence is emerging that portions of this vast range are beginning to crack apart. Deep within the earth beneath the Appalachians, processes are unfolding that suggest massive structural instability. Entire ridges and valleys appear to be shifting, with fractures spreading silently through bedrock, warning of a potential collapse on a scale that is almost unimaginable. This development has geologists, environmentalists, and local communities deeply alarmed, not only for what it means to the land itself, but also for the millions of people who live near and within the Appalachian corridor. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The Appalachian Mountains are often celebrated for their age, with origins dating back some 480 million years to the Ordovician period. They were once as tall and dramatic as the Himalayas, forged in violent tectonic clashes between ancient continents. Over time, wind, water, and glacial movement wore them down, leaving the rolling but rugged ridges and valleys we see today. Despite their weathered appearance, many assume the Appalachians were geologically stable, remnants of ancient upheaval now long settled. However, the reality emerging from recent geological studies reveals a different story. The Appalachians are not at rest. The deep lithosphere beneath them is weakening, fragments of the crust are breaking, and the mountains are showing unmistakable signs of cracking apart. Seismic monitoring across the region has revealed small but consistent tremors, often too faint for residents to feel, yet frequent enough to indicate something unusual is happening. These tremors cluster in zones where the crust appears thinner or fractured, particularly along fault lines that extend beneath the Blue Ridge and Allegheny regions. Researchers studying these patterns suggest that the mountain roots, those massive sections of crust buried deep below the surface, are slowly detaching from the upper layers. This process, known as lithospheric delamination, can destabilize entire mountain chains. In essence, the Appalachians may be peeling away from within, creating voids and weaknesses that eventually manifest as surface cracks, landslides, or even massive collapses of ridges. One of the most striking indications of this phenomenon is the unusual uplift and subsidence observed in various Appalachian valleys. Certain areas are rising unexpectedly, while others are sinking at accelerated rates. This uneven shifting points to large-scale restructuring beneath the crust. Satellite-based measurements show that portions of the Appalachian Plateau are deforming in ways that cannot be explained by erosion alone. Combined with evidence of deep magma movement below the surface, it suggests that forces within the Earth are actively reshaping the mountains from below. Such activity is not typically associated with ranges as old and presumed stable as the Appalachians, which only heightens the concern among experts. The implications of a cracking Appalachian range extend far beyond the geological. The mountains play a central role in the hydrology of the eastern United States, channeling rainfall into countless rivers and aquifers. If entire slopes were to collapse or valleys to shift, the flow of major rivers like the Tennessee, Ohio, and Potomac could be disrupted. Water supplies for millions of people could be altered in unpredictable ways, with reservoirs and dams potentially destabilized. The natural barrier the Appalachians provide against storms moving inland from the Atlantic could also be compromised if fractures weaken ridges to the point of collapse, changing the way weather systems interact with the landscape. Communities nestled within the Appalachian valleys face particular danger. Towns and cities built along slopes that were once thought immovable now risk being undermined by landslides or sinkholes triggered by deep fractures. Roads that wind through mountain passes could become impassable if rockfalls increase. Energy infrastructure such as pipelines and power lines that run across the Appalachians may face catastrophic breaks if the ground beneath them gives way. The interconnectedness of modern infrastructure means that a collapse in even a relatively remote area could ripple outward, affecting states far removed from the immediate danger zones. Adding to the urgency is the fact that the Appalachians are rich in natural resources. Coal, natural gas, and timber have been extracted from these mountains for centuries. Mining and drilling activities have already left scars across the landscape, but if the mountains themselves are fracturing internally, human intervention may accelerate collapse. Vibrations from blasting, removal of supporting rock layers, and large-scale deforestation can all worsen structural instability. Scientists warn that continued exploitation of resources without careful monitoring could push fragile zones over the edge, triggering events far more destructive than anything previously imagined. Cultural and historical dimensions also come into focus when discussing the cracking of the Appalachian Mountains. For generations, the mountains have served as a backdrop to American history and identity. Indigenous tribes considered them sacred, European settlers used them as both barrier and refuge, and modern-day residents embrace them as home. To think of the Appalachians as collapsing is to imagine a wound not only to the environment but also to the collective psyche of the region. Communities tied to the land through heritage, tradition, and livelihood face the prospect of watching the very foundation of their world give way. On a broader scale, the potential collapse of the Appalachians highlights how even ancient and seemingly permanent features of the planet are subject to change. Geology operates on timescales far beyond human perception. Yet every so often, events unfold quickly enough to remind us that the Earth is alive and in motion. The cracking of the Appalachians, if it continues unchecked, could be one such reminder. The collapse of a ridge or the sudden sinking of a valley would not only alter the map, but also shake the assumption of permanence that has long accompanied these mountains. Scientists studying the situation urge vigilance. While it is difficult to predict when or where large-scale collapses might occur, the warning signs are accumulating. Monitoring systems are being expanded, satellite data is scrutinized for subtle shifts, and geologists are working to map out zones of highest risk. The challenge lies in the scale of the range, which stretches for nearly 2,000 miles from Alabama to Newfoundland. Cracks and fractures may appear sporadically, leaving communities with little time to react before events unfold. Preparing for the possibility of sudden ground shifts becomes not only a geological concern, but also a public safety imperative. The ecological consequences of a cracking Appalachian range are equally troubling. The mountains are home to one of the most biodiverse temperate forests in the world, sheltering thousands of plant and animal species, many of which are rare or endangered. If slopes collapse or valleys sink, entire habitats could be wiped out in an instant. Rivers clouded with sediment from landslides would choke aquatic ecosystems, while forests stripped from ridges could take centuries to recover. The Appalachians serve as critical corridors for migrating species. Fragmentation caused by geological collapse could disrupt these pathways, further stressing fragile populations. Economic ramifications loom large as well. Tourism is a lifeline for many Appalachian communities, with visitors drawn to hiking trails, scenic vistas, and national parks. A landscape marred by collapses or deemed unsafe due to geological instability would drive visitors away, undermining local economies already struggling with post-industrial decline. Conversely, reconstruction efforts following a collapse could strain state and federal budgets, as roads, bridges, and towns would require rebuilding. Insurance markets might also be destabilized if the region is declared high risk for geological disasters, leaving residents with few financial protections. As researchers piece together the puzzle of the Appalachian fractures, one theme emerges with clarity. The mountains are not as immutable as once thought. Beneath the rolling hills and tranquil forests, forces of immense power are at work, tugging and tearing at the very bones of the range. Each crack that forms is a whisper of what may come, each tremor a signal from the depths. Whether the ultimate result is gradual disintegration over centuries or sudden catastrophic collapse in the near future, the implications are profound. This situation compels reflection on humanity's relationship with the natural world. For too long, stability has been assumed where only balance exists. The Appalachians, revered for their endurance, are now revealing their vulnerability. Their cracking apart serves as both a warning and a lesson. The Earth is never still, and even its oldest giants can falter. The story of the Appalachian Mountains is entering a new chapter, one that may reshape not only the landscape, but also the human understanding of permanence, fragility, and change on a planetary scale. The Appalachian Mountains are not simply a line of ridges cutting across the eastern United States. They are the skeletal remains of an ancient supercontinent's collision, remnants of colossal upheavals that reshaped the planet hundreds of millions of years ago. Yet, even as this history has long been celebrated, new findings expose a fragile truth. Deep fractures are spreading within the range, and vast sections are beginning to give way. What makes this situation all the more extraordinary is that the very mechanisms that once gave rise to the Appalachians may now be unraveling them. The crust and mantle interactions beneath the surface, long thought dormant in this region, appear to be awakening. This awakening carries with it the warning of massive collapses, a reality that shakes our understanding of geological time and human safety alike. The very idea that a mountain range of such scale could crack apart raises questions about how stress builds and releases beneath the surface. In regions like California or Japan, the presence of well-defined active faults makes seismic instability unsurprising. But the Appalachians were not traditionally considered such a hotspot. Their earthquakes tend to be smaller, less predictable, and scattered. These so-called intraplate quakes, earthquakes occurring away from major tectonic boundaries, are particularly mysterious. The presence of these tremors throughout the Appalachian corridor signals that forces are still very much alive beneath the surface, pressing against fault lines, reawakening old fractures, and generating new breaks within the bedrock. This hidden seismicity suggests that the range is far from stable, and rather than standing as a monument to permanence, it may be on the cusp of dramatic geological change. One critical aspect of the cracking phenomenon is the way stress redistributes itself across a mountain range. As the deep roots of the Appalachians sink and detach from the upper crust, the weight and pressure shift in ways the land above cannot easily absorb. This causes localized points of weakness where fractures concentrate. Imagine a stone arch that has lost support at its base. The upper keystone does not collapse all at once, but cracks radiate outward until one section finally gives way, bringing the rest down. The Appalachians are exhibiting signs of just such a process, with subtle but increasing patterns of instability. When collapse comes, it may be sudden, with slopes collapsing like dominoes, releasing stored energy in an avalanche of rock and soil. What makes this even more pressing is the human footprint across the Appalachian corridor. Unlike remote ranges such as the Karakoram or Andes, the Appalachians are densely populated. Major metropolitan areas including Pittsburgh, Knoxville, Roanoke, and Birmingham all sit near or within zones at risk. These cities are tied directly to mountain hydrology, transportation routes, and energy corridors. Should sections of the range collapse, highways could be severed for weeks or months, pipelines ruptured, and entire communities cut off from supplies. Given the role these mountains play as a backbone of the eastern United States, the destabilization of even a single sector could have cascading consequences on national infrastructure. Beyond human settlement, there is the question of how the collapse of mountain sections would affect long-standing weather patterns. The Appalachians act as a massive barrier, intercepting moist air from the Atlantic and channeling rainfall across the interior. Their ridges force air masses upward, cooling and condensing moisture, creating rain shadows and sustaining ecosystems across thousands of miles. If cracks weaken major ridgelines, lowering or fragmenting them, the balance of precipitation could shift. Regions accustomed to reliable rainfall may dry out, while others might experience intensified storms. This would have far-reaching consequences for agriculture, forestry, and water management, creating new challenges for states already contending with climate variability. Adding further complexity, the Appalachians contain some of the oldest exposed rock formations in North America. These rocks preserve a record of the Earth's deep past, holding fossils, minerals, and evidence of long-vanished oceans. As fractures deepen and ridges destabilize, priceless geological archives are at risk of being lost. A sudden collapse could bury or obliterate sites that provide insights into evolutionary history and tectonic processes. For scientists, the prospect of losing these natural records is a race against time, as the very processes they study threaten to erase the evidence needed to understand them. The danger is compounded by the underground networks of karst systems that lace through many Appalachian valleys. These limestone landscapes are riddled with caves, sinkholes, and underground rivers. Already prone to collapse, karst regions become even more unstable when subjected to the kind of stress that a cracking mountain range delivers. Sinkholes could appear on scales never seen before, swallowing entire neighborhoods or industrial facilities. The sudden opening of these subterranean voids would further destabilize overlying slopes, creating a chain reaction of geological failures. Water contamination is another looming risk, as collapsing karst systems could redirect polluted runoff into aquifers that supply millions of people with drinking water. There is also the troubling prospect of fire risk following structural collapse. When forests are torn apart by landslides or upheaval, vast amounts of deadwood accumulate. These debris fields, coupled with shifting patterns of rainfall, could create tinderbox conditions. A single lightning strike could ignite infernos that sweep across valleys and ridges, further destabilizing slopes by burning away protective vegetation. Fires in mountainous terrain are notoriously difficult to control, and combined with ongoing collapse, they could accelerate erosion and transform entire ecosystems in mere years. From an economic standpoint, the energy corridors threading the Appalachians present vulnerabilities few have considered. Natural gas pipelines traverse ridgelines carrying fuel across state lines. High-voltage power lines run from generating stations in mountain valleys to cities far beyond. The cracking of ridges threatens all of this. A single landslide that severs a pipeline could cause explosions and toxic leaks, while power grid interruptions could cascade across multiple states. These are not speculative risks. The proximity of infrastructure to unstable slopes means that cracks in the mountains translate directly into risks for energy security. Considering that the Appalachians house portions of the Marcellus and Utica shale formations, themselves centers of intensive drilling, the risk multiplies. Energy extraction not only strains the land but also magnifies the consequences of geological failure. The Appalachian collapse scenario also prompts reflection on long-term climate feedback loops. When mountain slopes collapse, they expose fresh rock surfaces that can chemically interact with the atmosphere. While some of these reactions absorb carbon dioxide, others release trapped gases, including methane from underground pockets. The Appalachians, riddled with coal seams and natural gas reservoirs, could release significant greenhouse gases if fractured. This would contribute to atmospheric warming, feeding into the very climate shifts that intensify weather extremes and stress ecosystems. Thus, the cracking of the Appalachians could have global as well as regional consequences. The cultural fabric of the Appalachian region also faces disruption in ways that go beyond immediate physical danger. Appalachian communities are deeply tied to their land, with traditions of farming, music, storytelling, and craftsmanship rooted in the mountains. A collapse would not simply displace people physically, but would sever bonds of heritage tied to specific hollows, ridges, and rivers. Cemeteries perched on hillsides, centuries-old homesteads, and sacred indigenous sites could vanish beneath landslides or fractures. The psychological impact of losing these ties could rival the material damage, leaving communities unmoored as the land that has defined their identity crumbles. Educational institutions and research centers across the Appalachian region are also grappling with the implications of this crisis. Universities in states like West Virginia, Tennessee, and Virginia have long depended on the mountains as living laboratories for geology, ecology, and environmental science. If collapses accelerate, these landscapes of study could become zones of restricted access, deemed too dangerous for students or researchers. The loss of safe access would hamper efforts to understand what is happening just as clarity is most needed. Scientists would face the dilemma of studying a phenomenon that threatens to erase their very field sites. Meanwhile, artistic and literary traditions that have drawn inspiration from the Appalachian landscape face their own uncertain future. Writers, painters, and musicians have long looked to the ridges and valleys as sources of metaphor and meaning. The cracking apart of these mountains introduces an unsettling note, transforming symbols of endurance into emblems of fragility. Creative responses may attempt to capture this transition, but for many, the sense of loss could overshadow inspiration. The collapse of the Appalachians is not just geological, it is cultural, existential, and symbolic, striking chords across the entire spectrum of human experience. Global observers are beginning to take notice as well. The Appalachian crisis is not isolated. It connects to broader concerns about mountain ranges worldwide. From the Himalayas to the Andes, many ranges are under stress from tectonic activity, glacial retreat, or human exploitation. The Appalachians serve as a reminder that no mountain system is immune to collapse, even one as ancient and weathered as this. What is unfolding in the eastern United States may prove to be a case study in how societies respond when a landscape long assumed to be stable suddenly betrays that trust. International collaborations may emerge as scientists seek to compare notes, applying lessons from one range to another in an effort to anticipate the unpredictable. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the Appalachian Mountains cracking apart? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.